Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're tackling something you specifically asked about David R. Hawkins' book, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. But we're zeroing in on chapter 21 today.
Oh yeah, the Q&A chapter. It's like a rapid-fire workshop all crammed in there.
Exactly. It's Hawkins answering real questions from people just like you, figuring out how to actually do this whole letting go thing.
Makes it super practical, right?
Absolutely. So in this deep dive, we're going deep. We're going to see how this technique actually works, how it surprisingly fits with so many different beliefs or even no beliefs, and how it could honestly impact your life in ways you might not expect. All straight from Hawkins' answers to common questions and curiosities.
Let's jump in.
All right, so the chapter starts off with some pretty big picture stuff, how letting go works with spirituality and religion.
Right out the gate.
And it makes a pretty sweeping claim. It says letting go doesn't conflict with any religion, spiritual path, self-help thing, philosophy, like anything. Sounds kind of bold, right?
Wow. It does sound like a huge statement, but when you look at the reasoning behind it, it's actually pretty simple. The technique itself doesn't teach any new doctrines or anything.
Right.
It's more like it dissolves the stuff that gets in the way, the mental and emotional clutter. So whatever path you're already on, whether it's religious or not, you can move forward more easily.
Makes sense. So it's not about replacing your beliefs, it's about clearing out the stuff that might be blocking them.
Exactly.
It even mentions humanism, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that might seem a little unexpected, but it all comes back to this idea that's central to so many spiritual traditions: growing your capacity for love. The chapter makes the point that surrendering is, at its core, about breaking down the barriers we've built against love. Love for ourselves, for others, and for something bigger than ourselves, however you want to define that.
Right, right.
So if humanism is all about compassion and connection, letting go becomes a tool to strengthen those things. You see, it's not about dogma, it's about what you're already working towards.
Yeah, okay, so letting go isn't a new set of beliefs. It's like a universal tool to help you with the beliefs you already have.
Totally.
Okay, now here's where things get really interesting. The chapter connects letting go to this idea of surrendering the small self, or the ego. It says that it helps dissolve that ego so the true inner self can emerge.
And when he talks about the small self or ego, he means that part of us that's driven by fear, pride, and the need to control things.
Right, right.
It even gives examples from existing spiritual practices that we've all heard before, like let go and let God, or be still and know that I am God. Even the third step of Alcoholics Anonymous, turn your life and will over to the care of God as you understand him. These all point to that same act of inner surrender.
It's like letting go gives you a step-by-step guide for those bigger spiritual ideas.
Exactly. It takes those abstract instructions and makes them something you can actually do in your everyday life. And here's the thing the chapter points out, that even people who aren't into spirituality or who don't consider themselves religious have found more love, happiness, and well-being through this technique.
Really? Just from letting go?
That's what it says. And then it brings in Carl Jung's idea that every single person, whether they realize it or not, has to deal with this idea of God or a higher power at some point.
Okay, interesting.
And it suggests that letting go can help sort out any internal conflicts you might have about that.
Oh, okay. So even if you're an atheist who's like, I don't believe in any of that stuff, or if you're a believer who's going through a phase of doubt, this technique could still be helpful.
That's the idea,
Hmm.
because even questioning or rejecting something can bring up a lot of emotion, you know?
Yeah, totally. Now, the chapter then goes into an area that can be a little sensitive for some folks, the connection to sin.
Okay, so here's the thing. It says that all those negative feelings we deal with, pride, anger, fear, resentment, they can be seen as basically the same as the cardinal sins in a lot of religious traditions.
Oh, okay. So it's like by letting go of those negative feelings, you're actually living in line with what many religions teach.
Right. It's not about following a bunch of rules, but about removing the stuff inside that prevents you from actually living by those higher ideals.
Makes sense. Then it talks specifically about people who have their own spiritual paths, maybe not tied to a specific religion.
Yeah, and what it emphasizes here is that the idea of dissolving the ego with all its negativity is like a foundation for pretty much all spiritual exploration.
Okay.
And since letting go is all about releasing those negative patterns, it becomes a valuable tool no matter what path you're on. It's like a universal key to unlock deeper understanding in your spiritual journey.
Like the same tool can open different doors.
Exactly.
I like that. So it's like a universal solvent for egoic limitations. Then it talks about how this letting go impacts faith itself.
Right. The idea here is that anything that gets in the way of Faith, doubts, fears, anxieties, cynicism are basically forms of negativity.
Okay, yeah.
So by letting go of those negative emotions, you naturally make room for faith to grow or become stronger. It's like removing the static so the signal can come through more clearly.
It's hard to trust when you're full of doubt.
Exactly.
Okay. What about people who aren't believers but are still curious about spirituality or finding inner peace? Is there anything in the chapter for them?
Absolutely. It makes the point that the letting go technique is really just a tool. You can use it for practical stuff like achieving financial goals, or you can use it to remove the inner barriers that are stopping you from having spiritual awareness.
Interesting.
And many people who practice letting go regularly say they discover a really deep sense of love within themselves, and it doesn't depend on external circumstances or beliefs.
Wow. So you're not just managing emotions, you're maybe even uncovering something deeper about who you really are.
That's the idea.
That's pretty powerful. Now, the chapter moves on to guilt and how it relates to religion. It says that guilt is a big reason why some people walk away from religion altogether.
Oh, yeah, because sometimes the ideals presented can seem so high and impossible to reach.
Exactly. It can create this feeling like you're always failing, and that leads to a ton of guilt.
And the advice here is surprisingly gentle. Instead of getting stuck in that cycle of guilt where you feel bad about not living up to some ideal, try using the letting go technique on the negative feelings that come up.
Okay, so again, it's about dealing with the emotional side of things, not necessarily rejecting the whole religion.
Right. It's a tool you can use in any area of life, even to let go of that heavy guilt.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about inner practices, like meditation. How does letting go fit into all of that?
Well, the chapter points out that most meditation techniques have the same goal: to quiet down that constant mental chatter.
Like that saying, be still and know that I am God.
Exactly. Yeah. But as anyone who's tried to meditate knows, finding a quiet spot is the easy part. The real challenge is quieting those thoughts.
Oh, tell me about it. You finally sit down to meditate and your brain decides to have a meeting about every single worry you've ever had.
Right. But the chapter explains that if you acknowledge those underlying feelings and let go of the energy behind them, it can really help you quiet your mind. It even suggests that just surrendering the feeling that's fueling a particular thought can stop that whole thought train in its tracks.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah. And with practice, you can actually reach a really silent and still mind, not just when you're formally meditating, but even while you're doing everyday things.
Wow, that would be amazing. So it basically deepens your meditation practice even when you're not meditating.
Exactly.
Okay, what about other techniques people use, like affirmations and visualizations?
The chapter suggests that letting go can actually make those practices even more powerful. Like with affirmations, you're repeating positive statements, but sometimes those underlying negative beliefs can creep in, right?
The yeah buts.
Exactly. By identifying those inner resistances and surrendering them, you're clearing the way for those positive affirmations to really take root. It's like tuning an instrument. You got to get rid of the discordant notes before the harmony can really shine through.
So you're basically removing the static so the positive message can come through louder and clearer.
Right.
Now let's talk about how this technique works with psychotherapy.
So according to the chapter, therapists who have studied this technique and use it with their patients say it's incredibly helpful. It apparently really speeds up therapy because it helps people let go of negativity and those limiting beliefs that hold them back.
Makes sense. If you can release some of that heavy emotional baggage you've been carrying around, it frees up space for healing and growth.
Exactly. And the chapter also mentions benefits for therapists themselves. By learning to let go of their own unresolved negativity, they can better understand their patients and deal with countertransference.
Countertransference.
Yeah, it's when a therapist has unconscious emotional reactions to a patient, and it can sometimes get in the way of the therapy. Letting go helps them become more aware of that and release it.
Okay, yeah.
And it can also protect them from burnout and stress, which can be a real problem in that field. Oh, and the chapter also says that letting go works well with group therapy and even Jungian analysis.
Interesting. So it's a pretty versatile tool that can be used alongside different types of therapy.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to a really tough topic. Addiction. Specifically, alcoholism and drug addiction.
This is where it gets really powerful. The chapter explains how letting go can be a huge help when working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, especially the third step, which is about turning your will and life over to God. That one can be a real sticking point for people.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people struggle with that step. How does letting go make it easier?
Well, it sees the act of surrender as being directly related to what the third step is all about, letting go of attachments, especially to your own willfulness,
Yeah.
which is basically the ego trying to control everything.
Okay, so it helps you loosen the grip of that ego.
Exactly. And the obsession with drinking or drugs is often rooted in deeper negative feelings, like trauma or attachment issues. So when you surrender those underlying emotional drivers, the pull of the addiction weakens. It's like you're dismantling the foundation that the addiction is going on.
That's a powerful way to look at it. So it's not about just resisting the urge, but about addressing what's causing the urge in the first place.
Exactly. And it also points out that addiction is often an attempt to escape painful feelings by seeking that temporary relief from a high. So by learning to face and let go of those feelings directly, the need to escape them diminishes.
Okay, so it's like taking away the reason for wanting to escape in the first place.
Exactly.
That's really insightful. But it's important to remember that letting go isn't meant to replace AA or therapy. It's a tool to use alongside them.
Definitely. It's a complement, not a replacement.
Now, let's move on to something we all deal with, relationships. The chapter starts off by busting a common myth about spirituality.
Oh yeah, the idea that if you're spiritually evolved, you won't have any negative feelings anymore, like you're some kind of emotionless robot.
Right.
But the chapter emphasizes that everyone has feelings, no matter how far along they are on their spiritual path. And it's important to not beat yourself up when you feel negative emotions. We're all human, and we all go through it.
So it's not about becoming emotionless, it's about changing how you relate to your emotions.
Exactly.
The chapter then gives some really practical advice for dealing with resentment at work, like if you have a colleague who isn't pulling their weight.
And the key here is to acknowledge those feelings of resentment without either suppressing them or blowing up at the person.
Right, because both of those are unhelpful.
Totally. Instead, the technique involves turning your attention inward, allowing yourself to feel the resentment without judgment, and then consciously choosing to shift your focus to something else.
So you're not repressing the feeling, you're acknowledging it and then letting it go.
Exactly. There's a difference between shifting your attention and repressing something. Repressing means you're trying to ignore it completely, which can make things worse.
Okay, so what about when those negative feelings keep coming back? Like that annoying colleague just keeps being annoying no matter how much you try to let go.
The chapter suggests that when a negative feeling keeps popping up, it might be a sign of a deeper pattern in your life. Maybe something from your childhood or your culture that's influencing how you react.
Okay, interesting.
So the idea is to take some time to think about those patterns and then use the letting go technique on the root of the issue.
And what if you try that and the feeling still persists?
Well, the chapter talks about the possibility of karmic patterns at play. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just accept the situation for what it is and recognize that there might be deeper stuff going on that you don't fully understand. It's about accepting that some things are beyond your immediate control.
That can be hard, but it makes sense. The chapter then gets into more specific relationships, like a teacher who's annoyed by their students.
And the advice there is the same as the general principle. Accept the feeling without judgment, allow it to be there, recognize that it's just energy, and then consciously choose to let it go.
So what about those little annoyances that pop up in even the best relationships, like with your spouse or partner?
The chapter says those are just a normal part of being human, especially when you live with someone. It suggests trying to understand how your partner processes things differently than you do, letting go of judgment and that need to be right, and accepting that you're two different people with different preferences.
You know, like the classic thermostat battle.
Exactly. The key to peace is to let go of that need to control your partner or expect them to change who they are.
And sometimes a little sense of humor can go a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It even suggests making a list of your own annoying habits to get a little perspective.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So it's about accepting your partner as they are, quirks and all. Now, what about parents? They often deal with a lot of difficult emotions, especially toward their kids.
The chapter points out that parents often need to let go of those rigid expectations they have for their kids. Every kid is different.
And sometimes you got to let go of any unconscious favoritism you might have.
It's easier said than done, right?
Definitely. And it also mentions the whole tough love approach.
Yeah, sometimes letting your child experience the natural consequences of their actions, even if it hurts you to see them struggle, is the best thing for their growth.
That's tough, but sometimes necessary. Okay, this next topic might raise some eyebrows. What about the idea that if you let go of guilt, you might end up doing bad things, like becoming promiscuous?
The chapter directly addresses that concern. It says that promiscuity usually stems from things like low self-esteem and a lack of self-love, not from a lack of guilt.
Oh, interesting.
And letting go of negativity and selfishness actually helps you become more loving and raises your self-esteem, which leads to healthier relationships.
So it's not about removing your moral compass, it's about strengthening it.
Exactly.
The chapter also mentions that it works well with behavioral retraining techniques, like those used in sex therapy.
Yeah, because those techniques focus on replacing negative patterns with positive ones. And that aligns perfectly with letting go, which is all about releasing the inner blocks that are causing those negative patterns in the first place.
Makes sense. What about specific issues like impotence and frigidity? Is letting go presented as a cure for those?
Not exactly. It emphasizes that it's not a medical treatment, but it is a powerful tool for self-discovery. Problems like impotence and frigidity often come from deep-seated beliefs and repressed emotions, like guilt, fear, or anger.
Okay.
So by using the letting go technique, people can uncover those hidden feelings and start to understand what's really going on. And many people who have used this technique have seen improvements in their sex lives.
So it's not a quick fix, but it's a way to get to the root of the issue.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about aging. How does letting go apply to getting older?
The chapter suggests that letting go can help you age more gracefully. It can help you deal with the frustrations that come with physical decline and having to rely on others more.
Yeah, those can be tough things to accept.
Totally. But it encourages you to see aging as a natural preparation for leaving this world so you can focus on what's truly important.
That's a really different way of looking at it. It's not about fighting against getting older, but about embracing it as a natural part of life.
Right. And surrendering to the process instead of resisting it can bring you more peace, more love for others, and a deeper understanding that allowing others to help you is actually a gift you're giving them.
Wow, that's beautiful. So it's about shifting the perspective from seeing aging as a loss to seeing it as a transition.
Exactly.
Okay, we've talked a lot about what letting go is and how it can be used in different areas of life. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do you actually make surrendering a regular practice?
Well, the chapter says the most important thing is to genuinely want to be free from that negative feeling. You have to want it more than you want to hold on to the feeling, even if it's familiar.
Makes sense.
And it gives some practical tips, like using visual reminders, creating a daily routine of surrendering thoughts and feelings, maybe keeping a journal to track your progress.
Oh, I like that, a letting go journal.
Right. And it also says it's helpful to remind yourself that you always have the choice not to surrender, which can actually make it easier to let go.
That's interesting, like knowing you have a choice somehow makes it less scary.
Exactly.
What does the chapter say is the biggest obstacle that stops people from surrendering?
It says it's the belief that holding on to a negative feeling will somehow get you what you want, especially when it comes to other people. Like we might unconsciously believe that staying angry will make someone change their behavior.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that.
But letting go of that fantasy, the idea that your negative emotion has power over other people, is crucial for being able to let go of the feeling itself.
So it's about recognizing that your anger isn't actually a magic wand to control others.
Right.
Now, some people might worry that if they're always surrendering, they'll become passive and won't get anything done. What does the chapter say about that?
It actually says the opposite. Surrendering clears your mind and gives you more energy to take effective action.
Yeah.
It helps you let go of inhibitions and see things more clearly so you can respond to situations in a more constructive way.
Okay. So it's not about becoming a doormat. It's about becoming more free to act in a way that aligns with your values.
Exactly.
The chapter also talks specifically about anger.
Yeah, and it says that anger is usually rooted in fear and feeling powerless, like your body's alarm system is going off because it senses a threat.
Makes sense.
But surrendering is about accessing your inner strength so you don't need that reactive anger anymore. You can still choose to express anger if it's appropriate, but it becomes a conscious choice, not an automatic reaction.
So you're not suppressing your anger, you're just not letting it control you. Now, here's a question. If surrender is a natural ability we all have, why do we need to learn a technique to do it?
Because our minds are complicated, and we often have conflicting desires. Part of us wants to be free from negative feelings, but another part might be clinging to them because it thinks they're serving some purpose.
Okay, I can see that.
So, consciously practicing the letting go technique gives us more control over those competing desires. It helps us move from being ruled by our emotions to becoming the masters of our own minds.
I like that, from being ruled to being the master.
Right?
Now, what about those of us who really struggle with acceptance? Does the chapter have any advice for that?
It says to focus on what's actually important in this moment. Like, if it's raining, you can't change that, but you can put on a raincoat.
Okay, yeah.
There are a lot of things in life that are outside of our control, and the key is to let go of that resistance, to stop wishing things were different. It even talks about how war has been a constant throughout history.
Wow, that's a big one.
Right, but accepting that reality can bring a certain peace because you're not fighting against something that's always been there.
So it's about accepting what is and focusing your energy on what you can. Change your own reactions and choices.
Exactly.
Okay, one last question on this part. How does surrendering affect those deep-seated motivations that drive us, like the desire for success, especially if those motivations are based on fear or insecurity?
The chapter says that when you let go of a fear-based motivation, your mind doesn't just leave an empty space. It naturally replaces it with something more positive, like genuine enjoyment of what you're doing.
So you might still be driven to succeed, but it's coming from a healthier place.
Exactly. It's like you're upgrading your fuel source from fear to something more sustainable and enjoyable.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the idea that if we let go of things like guilt, we might end up behaving badly?
It addresses that too. It says that as you let go of negativity and selfishness, you actually become more loving and considerate of others.
Well, you're not losing your moral compass, you're actually strengthening it.
Right. You're moving from acting out of fear to acting out of love.
Now, for those of us who aren't great at memorizing things, is this technique still something we can learn?
Absolutely. The chapter stresses that there's nothing complicated to memorize. It's not about intellectual understanding. It's about cultivating a feeling, a way of being.
Okay, that's good to know. Sometimes it can be hard to know if you're actually letting go or just suppressing a feeling. How can you tell the difference?
It suggests paying attention to any resistance you feel towards the process itself. If you're having negative thoughts or doubts about your ability to surrender, acknowledge them, and then apply the letting go technique to those very resistances.
So it's like surrendering your resistance to surrendering.
Exactly. And remembering your intention, wanting to be happier, more loving, more peaceful, can also help guide you.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the chapter ends with a discussion of something called surrender to the ultimate. What is that all about?
It's about taking the letting go technique to the next level and applying it to every single area of your life, without exception. This is described as a path to accelerated spiritual growth and transformation. But it takes serious dedication and a deep yearning for truth.
It talks about surrendering every single feeling, thought, and desire as soon as it arises, and doing this constantly. That sounds intense.
It's definitely presented as a very advanced practice. It gives an example of someone who spent 11 days in intense surrender, letting go of a major attachment.
11 days. Wow.
Yeah. And the key is to be willing to release everything that comes up, even your ideas about what's good or bad, desirable or undesirable. It's about completely accepting the way things are, the natural flow of life.
So it's about surrendering to the present moment without trying to change it.
Exactly. And the chapter says that when you do this completely, you might experience what it calls the presence or ultimate reality.
Okay.
And it's not some far-off goal. It's something that's always here, right now. But it's usually hidden by our desires, fears, and attachments.
So it's about letting go of everything that's blocking our awareness of what's already there.
Exactly. And the result is described as a state of infinite peace, timelessness, and a feeling of finally being home, like you've returned to who you truly are.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. So to sum it all up for you listening, this deep dive into chapter 21 of Letting Go shows just how powerful and practical this technique really is. It can lead to a deep sense of peace and freedom that doesn't depend on any specific belief system. And it can be used to address so many different challenges in life, from everyday annoyances to deep spiritual questions.
And what's amazing is that it's all based on real people asking real questions, so it feels relatable and achievable. It's not just theory, it's lived experience.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, we want you to consider this. What's one small thing you're holding on to that you could try letting go of, even just for a moment? See what happens. You might be surprised by what you discover. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.